I've always thought of myself as a reasonable guy. My name is Mike and I'm in my mid-30s. I had a pretty solid life, stable job, nice house, and a wife, Sarah, who I thought was my partner for life. We had been married for 6 years and like every couple, we had our ups and downs. But recently, things had felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. Little signs, I guess. Sarah had started spending more time on her phone, and when I'd ask her about her day, she'd give these vague, noncommittal answers. It was almost as if she was living in a different world, one where I didn't exist. The trouble really started when I had to go on a business trip for a week. I went to Chicago and I didn't think too much about it. I trusted Sarah. I remember texting her from the hotel, telling her I missed her. Just typical husband stuff, right? But what I didn't know was that while I was away, she was busy making choices that would change everything. When I returned home, I picked up on more than just a lingering sense of awkwardness. It was palpable. I could feel it hanging in the air like stale smoke. It was around 9 p.m. one night when I decided to search for a file on her laptop. I know, a breach of trust in its own right, but I was looking for something related to a project we had discussed. Instead, I stumbled upon her email account. The inbox was flooded with messages, mostly from someone named Jake. That name sent my heart racing. I figured it was a coworker, or worse, a friend. But the tone of the emails told me otherwise, flirty, too personal, even suggestive. They were planning to meet up while I was gone. My hands were shaking as I read the back and forth exchanges, the heart emojis, the promises of meeting in secret. I felt sick to my stomach. I confronted her that very evening. I came home from work and waited for her to arrive. I swear, I could feel the tension in the walls. When she walked through the door, I was ready. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but my heart racing. As I laid it all out there, the emails, the messages, she just stood there, her face a mix of shock and denial. "Oh, come on, Mike, you're being ridiculous," she huffed, rolling her eyes. The bitchiness in her tone was unmistakable. "You're taking this all out of context. Jake is just a friend." I almost laughed at her absurdity. A friend? I knew better. "A friend you've been sexting while I was away. That's quite the friendship, Sarah." The excuses poured out faster than I could process them. She claimed I hadn't been around enough, that she felt lonely, that she was just trying to fill the void. It was all so predictable. I watched her talk, and the more she spoke, the angrier I became. Betrayal felt like a lead weight on my chest. My initial shock morphed into anger, and I could feel a fire igniting inside me. How could she do this? I'd never cheated on her, never even considered it. The emotional roller coaster was dizzying. I moved from anger to sadness, a wave of despair crashing over me as I realized the life I had built was crumbling. I had trusted her. She was supposed to be my ride or die. Instead, she chose to betray me with some guy, and all I could think about was how I had poured my heart into this relationship, only to be met with cold indifference. As the confrontation progressed, I started to envision my life without her. How would I survive? What would I even do next? I never thought I'd be that guy, the one whose wife cheated on him. But here I was, reeling. I needed to make a decision. Should I fight for our marriage, or should I cut the ties and start anew? The thought of being free, of shaking off the weight of her betrayal, started to appeal to me. I needed a plan. I needed to regain control of my life. But first, I needed to confront the emotional chaos within myself. After that night, everything changed. The house felt like a shell, an empty vessel that once held warmth and laughter but had now turned cold and distant. I still found it hard to believe the reality I was facing. I never thought Sarah would betray me, and yet here I was, standing at the edge of a precipice, wondering if it was time to jump. The days that followed were a blur. I returned to work, but my mind was elsewhere, lingering in the shadows of our broken relationship. My coworkers noticed something was off. I was quieter than usual, my responses were curt, and I found it hard to focus. I couldn't stop replaying our confrontation in my mind. Her empty excuses, her cold demeanor, and the way she looked at me like I was the delusional one for believing in our marriage. I felt isolated, alone in a crowd. People around me chatted idly about their lives, their relationships, while I was wrestling with mine, turning to ashes. I started to notice Sarah's behavior more closely. She'd come home late, always with the same excuses: work obligations, late meetings, and the ever-ambiguous, just hanging out with friends. I found myself waiting for her to come home, pacing the living room, wishing I could just fast forward through this nightmare. One evening, after yet another late night, I confronted her again. This time I was calmer but resolute. "We can't keep doing this, Sarah. You have to be honest with me. Are you still seeing Jake?" Her reaction was a mix of anger and defiance. "You're being paranoid, Mike. You need to trust." Me, she played the victim, making it seem like I was the one ruining everything. It was infuriating. I could feel the anger boiling beneath my skin. I wanted to scream, to tell her how her betrayal had shattered my trust, but I held it together, choosing my words carefully. "Trust is earned, Sarah. You've broken that trust," I said, my voice steady. I could see the flicker of shame in her eyes, but it quickly morphed back to anger. "You're being unreasonable. I can't keep doing this." And just like that, I felt the determination in me shift. I had to take control of this situation. I needed to find closure, even if it meant ending things completely. My happiness had become a distant memory, overshadowed by her actions. It was clear to me that she was not willing to fight for us. I began to formulate a plan. I started looking into apartments, considering a fresh start away from the memories that taunted me at every corner of the house. I wanted to escape not just from her, but from the life we had built together, one that had become tainted with betrayal. I spent hours scrolling through listings, envisioning a new life, one where I could rebuild without the weight of her dishonesty. I also reached out to some old friends, people I hadn't connected with in years. At first, it felt awkward, like I was intruding into a different life I had left behind. But as I reconnected with them, I began to feel a sense of normalcy. They offered support, and their stories reminded me that I was not alone in this. I shared bits of my heartache, and they listened without judgment. With each passing day, I felt a little more empowered. I started taking better care of myself, hitting the gym more regularly, and even picking up some hobbies I had neglected. I wanted to become someone I could be proud of again. I even began to fantasize about moving to a different city, a fresh start where the memories of Sarah wouldn't haunt me. But as much as I was ready to move on, the final confrontation loomed. I knew I had to face her one last time to truly cut the ties. It was going to be difficult, but that was the next step in reclaiming my life. The day of the final confrontation felt heavy, like the air was thick with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. I had spent the previous night going over what I wanted to say, rehearsing it in the mirror like an actor preparing for a big scene. I needed to be clear, firm, and above all, decisive. It was time to draw the line. Sarah came home that evening, looking tired but still wearing that same careless attitude. She plopped down on the couch, scrolling through her phone, seemingly unfazed by the storm brewing between us. I felt a mix of anger and pity watching her. How could she act like nothing was wrong? But I knew better than to let emotion dictate my approach. I had to be calm. "Sarah, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. She looked up. The bemused expression on her face was infuriating, but I pressed on. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I can't keep living like this." She rolled her eyes, a habit I had come to associate with denial. "What now, Mike? I'm tired, I just want to relax. Can't we talk about this later?" "No, we can't," I replied, cutting her off. "This can't wait. I've been thinking about us, about our marriage." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my words. "I can't trust you anymore. I've seen the messages, and I can't ignore what's been happening between you and Jake." She shifted uncomfortably, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. "I told you, he's just a friend." She snapped, her voice rising defensively. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is." I couldn't help but scoff. "A friend you're having sex with. A friend you've been planning to sneak away with. That's not just a friend, Sarah, that's betrayal." My voice was firm, but my heart was racing. I had anticipated her defensive stance, but hearing her excuses again made my blood boil. "Mike, you're overreacting. I didn't mean to hurt you, it was just I felt lonely." She shot back, her tone rising in desperation. "You were always busy with work, and I needed someone to talk to." "Lonely?" I echoed, incredulity flooding my voice. "You didn't just talk to him, you let him in. You chose to be intimate with him while I was away. That's not loneliness, that's a choice to cheat on me. Maybe if you had been around more, I wouldn't have had to look for someone else." She yelled, her eyes flashing with defiance. It was as if she was trying to deflect every ounce of responsibility back onto me. I could feel the old anger bubbling up again, but I refused to give in to it. "We're not doing this, Sarah. I'm not here to take the blame for your actions," I said, my voice steady. "This isn't about me not being home enough. This is about you lying to me and choosing someone else over our marriage." Her expression changed, the defiance giving way to a kind of resignation. "So, what do you want? Are you going to throw our whole life away because of a mistake?" I felt the sharp stab of pain at her words. A mistake. It felt so trivializing, so dismissive. "This is not a mistake, this is a pattern. You've made a choice to betray me, and honestly, I'm done with this. I want a divorce and I want it to be final." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and irreversible. She looked at me, the anger replaced by something softer, maybe regret. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We can work through this. I can prove to you that I can change." "Change? You've had your chance, Sarah. I've given you the benefit of the doubt, and now I need to think about my own happiness. I can't keep living like this, pretending everything is fine. I've lost the person I thought you were, and I want out." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, but I stood my ground. This was the end of the line. I was finally taking control of my life, and even though it hurt to see her like this, I couldn't let her manipulate me any longer. "I'll get a lawyer," I added, feeling a sense of urgency. "And I'll be moving out soon. No more pretending, no more playing house." Her lips quivered as she struggled to process my words. "Mike, please. Don't do this," she whispered, her voice cracking. But I had made up my mind. This was a step toward freeing myself from the chains of betrayal, and no amount of pleading would change my resolve. As I walked away from that confrontation, I felt a mix of relief and sadness wash over me. The chapter of our lives together had come to an irrevocable end. But in that moment, I also felt a flicker of hope. I was finally reclaiming my life, and it was time to move forward. The days after that confrontation were surreal. I felt like I was living in a dream, or rather, a nightmare from which I couldn't wake. The anticipation of change weighed heavily on my mind. I spent hours researching divorce proceedings, searching for a lawyer, and figuring out how to untangle the life Sarah and I had built together. It felt daunting, but at the same time, I was fueled by a sense of liberation. I moved into a small apartment a couple of weeks later, just a few blocks away from my old home. It was nothing fancy, but it felt like a breath of fresh air. The walls were bare, and the furniture was minimal, yet it was mine, free from the shadows of betrayal and deceit. I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in years. I could finally focus on myself and the life I wanted to rebuild. I avoided all contact with Sarah at first. It wasn't easy, especially when she would text or call, sounding desperate to talk. I resisted the urge to respond, reminding myself that this was my time to heal. I started going out with my old friends more often, reconnecting with the people who had seen me through thick and thin. We would go to bars, grab dinner, and just enjoy life without the weight of betrayal hanging over my head. For the first time in a long while, I laughed, and it felt good. As the divorce proceedings began, I felt a mix of anxiety and relief. The lawyer explained the process to me, laying out the steps, and though I was nervous, I was also determined. I had made my decision, and nothing could sway me now. I learned that Sarah was contesting the divorce, claiming that I was the one who had driven her away. It felt absurd, but I was prepared for the battle. One evening, I was out with friends when my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. It was Sarah. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice unusually soft. I hesitated, feeling my heart race. Part of me wanted to say yes to hear her out, but I knew that would only complicate things. "I don't think that's a good idea, Sarah," I replied, my voice steady. "Please, Mike. I just want to explain myself," she pleaded. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. I realize I messed up. I was lonely and confused." Her words felt hollow. "You had your chance to explain, Sarah. Right now, I just want to focus on moving forward. "Is there any chance we can work this out? I've been going to therapy. I'm trying to change," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't trust you anymore," I said, cutting her off. "You made your choices and now I'm making mine. This isn't about working it out, it's about my own happiness now." There was a long pause on the line and I could sense her frustration. "You'll regret this," she said, her tone icy. "Maybe, but I'd rather regret moving on than regret staying in a relationship built on lies." I hung up before she could respond, feeling a mix of empowerment and sadness wash over me. I was finally reclaiming my life, but the emotions still lingered. As I navigated this new chapter, I focused on building my confidence. I started taking cooking classes, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for while married. It was liberating to try new things and meet new people. I even went on a couple of dates, but those were more about exploring possibilities than seeking a serious connection. I wasn't ready for that yet. However, the shadow of my past still loomed. There were moments when I would catch myself thinking of Sarah, reminiscing about the good times. But I quickly reminded myself of the betrayal, of the hurt and anger that had led me to this point. The divorce process continued to unfold, and I found myself preparing for the inevitable court date. I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach, but I also felt a sense of determination. I was ready to face this head-on and finally close the chapter on my marriage. As the court date approached, I couldn't shake the feeling of impending change. Would I finally be free? Would I be able to let go of everything that had happened and move forward? I had no idea what the future held, but I was ready to find out. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, peering down into the unknown. I dressed carefully, opting for a simple but professional outfit, nothing flashy, just a white shirt and dark slacks. I wanted to look composed, even if my insides felt like a storm was brewing. As I walked into the courthouse, I reminded myself that this was about reclaiming my life, about moving past the pain that had overshadowed my existence for far too long. The courtroom was small and sparse, a stark contrast to the emotional weight it carried. I took my seat and waited as the proceedings began. I could see Sarah sitting on the other side, her expression a mix of defiance and vulnerability. It was strange to see her like this, my partner in life reduced to a stranger in a legal setting. Her eyes darted around the room and I could tell she was just as anxious as I was. When it was our turn to speak, I felt a wave of uncertainty wash over me. I stood before the judge, my heart racing. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say, but now the words felt jumbled in my mind. I took a deep breath and began. "Your Honor, I'm here today to seek a divorce from Sarah. Our marriage has been irreparably damaged due to infidelity, and I believe it's in both of our best interests to move forward separately." My voice was steady, but I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I glanced over at Sarah, and I could see tears pooling in her eyes. There was a moment of silence before she spoke. "I believed we could work on our issues. I've been going to therapy, and I thought we could try to rebuild our relationship," she said, her voice shaky but filled with desperation. The judge listened patiently, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. I knew she would try to sway him with her pleas. "Sarah, I appreciate your willingness to seek help, but the trust has been broken beyond repair," I interjected. "I need to prioritize my own well-being. I can't live in a constant state of suspicion and heartache." The judge nodded, seemingly taking in both of our arguments. I could feel a sense of clarity wash over me. This was my chance to stand my ground, to assert my needs above everything else. As the hearing continued, I listened to the arguments being made about property division and finances. None of it felt particularly important next to the emotional turmoil we had both endured. Yet I knew it had to be resolved, and I was determined to see it through. After what felt like an eternity, the judge finally gave his ruling. "Based on the evidence presented, the court grants the divorce. You are both free to pursue your lives separately." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was finally over. I could feel tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, but I swallowed them down. This wasn't a moment to mourn. It was a moment to celebrate my freedom. As I stepped out of the courtroom, I took a deep breath of fresh air. I could sense a burden lifting off my shoulders. I was ready to embrace whatever came next. I had faced my fears, confronted my past, and emerged on the other side. Later that day, I called a couple of friends to meet up for drinks. I wanted to celebrate this new chapter in my life. The emotions were still raw, but I was determined to focus on the future. We gathered at a local bar, laughter and chatter filling the air. I shared the news of my divorce and my friends were supportive, encouraging me to let loose and enjoy this newfound freedom. As the drinks flowed, I felt lighter, almost giddy. By the end of the night, I was surrounded by friends, joking and reminiscing about the good times we had shared in the past. It felt like a small but significant victory. I raised my glass for a toast, to new beginnings. As my friends cheered, I couldn't help but smile. I had taken a massive step toward rebuilding my life. I was no longer the guy who had been betrayed. I was Mike, a man ready to embrace whatever life had in store for him. But as I celebrated, a small voice in the back of my mind reminded me that healing would take time. I had to be patient with myself, allow myself to grieve the loss of what had been. I wasn't ready to jump into a new relationship yet, but I was open to the possibilities that lay ahead. The weeks following the divorce felt like a whirlwind, both freeing and overwhelming. I focused on establishing my new routine. I got into a rhythm of waking up early, hitting the gym, and actively seeking out things that sparked joy. I began writing again, something I hadn't done since before my marriage. At first, it was just journaling, pouring my thoughts and feelings onto the page, but soon it morphed into short stories and reflections about my experiences. This became my outlet, almost like therapy, allowing me to process everything that had happened. I also started exploring my city in ways I hadn't before. I discovered cozy coffee shops, local art galleries, and parks where I could take long walks. It was strange at first, navigating life alone, but slowly I began to appreciate the silence and solitude. I was rediscovering who I was outside of the relationship, and it felt exhilarating. One evening, while sitting in a cafe, I struck up a conversation with a woman named Emily. She was vivacious and had a warmth that drew me in. We chatted effortlessly, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of interest. I was cautious. I didn't want to rush into anything, but the connection was undeniable. We exchanged numbers, and it felt good to think about the possibility of dating again. As I navigated this new phase of my life, I also reflected on my marriage and the lessons I had learned. The betrayal had been painful, but it had forced me to confront my own needs and desires. I had realized the importance of communication, trust, and mutual respect in a relationship. I promised myself that moving forward, I would prioritize these values. One night, as I sat in my apartment, sipping a glass of wine and reflecting on my journey, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had come a long way since the confrontation with Sarah. I was no longer the hurt husband. I was a man who had taken control of his life. I had embraced my freedom and was working toward a future filled with possibility. When I think back to the moment I discovered Sarah's infidelity, it still stings, but I no longer feel anger or betrayal. Instead, I see it as a pivotal moment in my life, one that led me to self-discovery, resilience, and ultimately happiness. I want to share this with anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation. Healing takes time, and it's okay to feel the weight of loss. But don't let that pain define you. Use it as fuel to rediscover yourself, to prioritize what truly matters in life. Surround yourself with supportive friends and take the time to process your feelings. Life is too short to be stuck in a cycle of hurt and betrayal. You owe it to yourself to find joy, to chase after the things that make you happy. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm living proof that it's possible. As I closed my journal that night, I smiled to myself. I was ready for whatever came next, full of hope and optimism. I was Mike, a man who had faced the storm and come out stronger on the other side. Life was waiting for me, and I was finally ready to embrace it.